A deadly night in Juarez after 2 officers were killed and another injured in shootings last night. It all happened around the same time across the city.
When you are a police officer in Mexico, you have a tough choice to make. You either become a good cop and get killed for it, or take the money and turn a blind eye to the atrocities being committed to innocent people.
Do you worry that you might not make it home?
Es difícil, es una parte muy difícil porque está de por medio mi vida. Han caído bastantes compañeros.
But there are those cops that have chosen the third option, join the criminals and help in the reign of terror. That's what Carlos Landin Martinez did. By day, he was a hero, protecting his people from criminals, but at night, he was a feared drug lord, trafficking thousands of pounds of narcotics into the US. How did he get to this point, and how was he finally busted? Let's explore in this video. Carlos Landin Martinez was born in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, Mexico, in 1955. From a young age, he always wanted to be a cop, and so after leaving school, he enrolled and became a member of the Tamaulipas State Police. Because of his hard work and aggressiveness in solving crimes and arresting criminals, he was promoted to commander of the Homicide Investigatory Task Force. He was very good at his job. They even nicknamed him El Puma Uno, which translates to Puma One, a reference to the American wildcat, also known as the cougar, which is known for its strength, skill, and agility. But El Puma was leading a double life. During the day, he was out fighting crime and arresting bad guys, but at night, he would join the same bad guys to commit crimes. He was reported to be working closely with the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas by running drug trafficking operations through the Reynosa corridor. If you don't already know, the Gulf Cartel is one of the oldest and most powerful cartels in Mexico. Around 1997, its leader, Ociel Cardenas Guillen, found himself in a brutal turf war with rival cartels. To keep his organization and leadership, he employed a retired Army lieutenant, Arturo Guzman de Chena, and asked him to recruit more Army deserters from the Mexican Special Forces, promising them more money to join the cartel.
El proceso más que nada fue que nos llegó el patrón, nos ofreció mejor paga, carros, casas, todo.
De Chena's Federal Judicial Police radio code was Z1 in Spanish, that's Zeta Uno. At the time, officers were known as Zetas, meaning the Zs, and that's how Los Zetas came to be formed in 1997. They became the Gulf Cartel's enforcement group, and from the very beginning, their primary goal was to destroy any enemy of the cartel.
What you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos, fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
Before the formation of Los Zetas, violence was just a means to an end for Mexican cartels. Bosses would order the assassination of rival kingpins to secure more power, and violent shootouts would ensure turf victories. But with the Los Zetas, things were completely different. These former specially trained soldiers already had a knack for violence and organized attacks. Now, they had a platform where they could be as brutal and ruthless as they wanted. In fact, they were even rewarded with honor medals if they outdid their rivals in violence or kill count.
So the Zetas really upped the ante of violence within their conflict and their use of terror. I think a lot of this comes from the fact they were from the military and they had this instruction of how you defeat insurgencies, this anti-insurgency training that had originated in the United States.
The group was especially known for its brutal shock and awe tactics, which involved removing people's head and displaying brutally murdered bodies openly in the streets for the public to see. This was meant to cause fear and serve as a warning to anyone who dared cross their path.
Si andas de hocicón, se te mocha la lengua. Si andas de dedo, se te mochan los dedos. Si metes la cabeza donde no te llaman, se te mocha la cabeza.
Other than narco trafficking, the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas were involved in protection rackets, assassinations, extortions, kidnappings, and other criminal activities.
Se brincan el río, hacen el trabajo de este lado, los matan, los levantan, los desaparecen prácticamente y se regresan para aquel lado. Por eso la policía nunca va a poder dar con el paradero.
No one was out of reach for Los Zetas, including politicians, police, soldiers, even innocent civilians.
Cualquier gente que tenga dinero, pues sí, gente rica que tiene dinero, ¿verdad?
La agarran, la levantan y le quitan su dinero.
These are the kind of people El Puma was getting in bed with. While El Puma wasn't working as a double agent for the cartel and law enforcement, he was spending time with his family in the US, acting as a loving and caring dad and grandpa. But El Puma's facade as a hero and law-abiding police officer would come into question in March 1997, when the Mexican Attorney General's office, PGR, arrested him and another police chief named Pablo Villanueva Hernandez for reportedly being involved with Los Nicos, a Reynosa-based drug gang. But there wasn't enough evidence to prove this claim, so he was released after a few hours and allowed to go back to his police duties, but not for long. In May 1999, Thomas Yarrington was elected as the new governor of Tamaulipas, and his first job in office was to clean up the Tamaulipas police force. He began by letting go of all the police chiefs who were suspected to be involved in narco-trafficking during the administration of his predecessor. Interestingly enough, Tomas would later be accused of laundering money for the infamous Los Zetas and the Gulf cartels, and other serious charges, including murder. But that's another story altogether. So, El Puma was one of the 9 police chiefs who were fired when Thomas Yarrington got in office. But instead of getting his life back in order, he decided to go into crime full-time. U.S. authorities tracked El Puma's drug trafficking activities back to 1998, when his criminal cells in Granjano and Peñitas, Texas, worked with a family-led smuggling ring headed by Francisco Meza Rojas, a former McAllen police officer. For nearly a decade, El Puma's drug trafficking cells were responsible for moving narcotics from Mexico into the U.S. Most of the narcotics from the Gulf cartel were cultivated in Michoacan, smuggled through Tamaulipas, and then redistributed in South Texas and throughout the rest of the U.S. The illicit cargo was crossed through the Rio Grande River and dropped off in designated spots for other middlemen to pick up.
Over the river or by lanchas, fishing boats that landed along Padre Islands.
The narcotics were then given to other smugglers who met in parking lots of businesses in the McAllen area. Smugglers linked to El Puma would then take the substances and store them in stash houses across the city. A group of smugglers would then take those narcotics past the U.S. Border Patrol stations in Falfurrias and Sarita, where they would then be distributed to cities like Dallas, Houston, Chicago, Tampa, and New York City. In August 2005, U.S. authorities discovered a tunnel that was used by El Puma's associates to smuggle drugs from Mexico to downtown Hidalgo, Texas. From 2005 to January 2007, El Puma was the second in command for the Gulf cartel in Reynosa. Among his duties included collecting piso, or taxes, from independent drug traffickers who wanted to smuggle their cargo through his corridor, which extended between the Tamaulipas municipalities of Gustavo Diaz Ordaz and Rio Bravo. Those who tried to go around this rule, or who were found responsible for losing the cargo or money, were kidnapped, tortured, and/or killed on El Puma's orders. This taxation system was a profitable business for the Gulf cartel. During that time, the Reynosa corridor was officially headed by Gregorio Sauceda Gamboa, or El Caramuela, a former investigative police officer turned kingpin, who reported to Ociel Cardenas Guillen, the top leader of the cartel. El Puma worked under both of them. However, Sauceda Gamboa began having issues with the Gulf cartel's leadership because of some personal issues. He was known to be a drunk and heavy substance user. He had also been diagnosed with cancer, and his health had started to deteriorate. This made him appear weak and unreliable to the cartel's leadership, so they began to sideline him. And as Gamboa's influence declined, El Puma began generating more influence and money. Gamboa did not take that lightly, and it triggered some internal conflicts within the organization. Many of the leaders supported Sauceda Gamboa and wanted him to continue running the corridor, but others disagreed. This conflict escalated when several high-ranking members of the cartel were found murdered. El Puma was also rumored to be dead, but El Puma wouldn't meet his end through gunfire. It will be at the hands of the police. In March 2003, the leader of the Gulf cartel, Ociel Cardenas, was captured in the city of Matamoros in a shootout between the Mexican military and Gulf cartel gunmen. He was one of the FBI 10 most wanted fugitives, with a bounty of $2 million on his head. According to reports, the 6-month military operation was planned and carried out in secret. The only people informed were the Mexican president, Mexico's Secretary of Defense, and the Attorney General. After his capture, Ociel Cardenas was sent to the federal high-security prison La Palma, but it was believed that he was still controlling the Gulf Cartel from prison, so he was extradited in 2007 to the United States. He was charged with money laundering, drug trafficking, homicide, and death threats to U.S. federal agents. Around the same time, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, started a big investigation called Operation Puma. They named it Puma after Landin Martinez, who was the main person they were after. The investigation began in Dallas, Texas, and they arrested over 30 people in Dallas, San Antonio, McAllen, and Laredo. The DEA worked together with police in Mexico and also teamed up with different levels of police in the U.S. They joined forces with police departments in places like Dallas, McKinney, and San Antonio. They also got help from the Texas Department of Public Safety, the U.S. Marshals Service, and the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The DEA said that the cooperation between all these agencies, even with Mexico, was really impressive and had never happened before. Besides going after El Puma, the DEA's investigation focused on catching 10 high-ranking members of the Gulf Cartel in Los Zetas, who were already in a most wanted list with bounties. In May 2007, U.S. federal authorities indicted El Puma and 13 others with crimes like narco-trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering, and it wasn't long before they had El Puma in custody. July 17, 2007, an off-duty DEA agent named Leonardo Silva was in a H-E-B supermarket in McAllen, Texas, buying corn for a barbecue with his family when he spotted El Puma inside the store. El Puma was buying watermelons and was accompanied by 2 men who appeared to be his bodyguards. Silva later said he came across El Puma by chance. The DEA had been looking into El Puma's connection with the Gulf Cartel for about 2 years. Silva recognized El Puma's face from the DEA case he and his colleagues were working on. A few days before, the DEA had gotten a tip that El Puma was in the Rio Grande Valley. Silva wasn't fully prepared to make the arrest, so he followed the guys from the supermarket. They drove through an intersection, and then he called the McAllen Police Department for help. When they caught up with El Puma, he didn't fight back and didn't have any weapons. He admitted he was El Puma. Even though there wasn't an arrest warrant for El Puma that day, the DEA had been told by Mexican authorities that they would arrest him in Mexico if they couldn't get a warrant in the US. He kind of fell into our lap, so we had to act quickly. You only get one chance with someone like Mr. Landin. El Puma went to court on July 19th for his first hearing. His lawyer told the judge that El Puma left Mexico and came to the US because he was afraid for his life. He said that El Puma used to be an honorable police officer and that the narco dealers he tried to catch wanted to kill him. The lawyer pointed out that many police commanders in Mexico are getting killed every day. This is actually true, and the numbers are alarming and they keep increasing every year. In fact, according to a report by Vice, the number of police officers getting killed by cartels in Mexico rose by more than 140% from 2020 to 2021. In March 2021, a police convoy was ambushed by armed men in southwestern Mexico, leaving 13 officers dead. And this is just one of many cases.
A deadly night in Juarez after 2 officers were killed and another injured in shootings last night. It all happened around the same time across the city.
You worry that you might not make it home?
Es difícil, es una parte muy difícil porque está de por medio mi vida. Han caído bastantes compañeros a manos de la delincuencia organizada.
Can you imagine going to work knowing that it might be your last day alive? It's really scary and disheartening when you think about it, because if the cartel can target armed and trained officers, what about innocent civilians who have no means of protecting themselves?
Things are out of control in Mexico. Many of these officers that die were not involved in any type of criminal activity. Matter of fact, some of them are killed because they refuse to cooperate with the cartel. They refuse to work with the cartel.
It's reported that the cartels give law enforcement officers 2 options. You either agree to get paid off or get a bullet. And I guess many officers choose the money, making police corruption widespread and Mexico police unreliable. This means that cartel's reign of terror will continue in Mexico unless someone does something about it.
Los policías municipales, la policía estatal, la policía ministerial, la judicial del estado, los soldados y la policía federal preventiva también, hasta los militares que están destacamentados en lo que es la frontera, están comprados con ellos.
But let's get back to El Puma. During the hearing, the prosecution explained the narco charges against El Puma, including 2 drug seizures between 2002 and 2005. A DA agent told the judge that 4 informants linked El Puma to 2 seizures in the US from Mexico. One of the sources even said he paid El Puma to let him freely move the illicit substances through the Reynosa corridor. El Puma's lawyer argued that the arrest was unlawful because there was no arrest warrant when they caught him outside the store. U.S. authorities said they didn't issue an arrest warrant because they didn't expect to arrest him in the U.S. since he rarely visited. The prosecution asked the judge not to grant bail to El Puma, despite having permission to enter the U.S. with his border crossing card. El Puma allegedly crossed the U.S.-Mexico border illegally through the Rio Grande River to visit his family. Authorities were unsure when he made it into the U.S. El Puma's lawyer claimed that the case against him was built by criminals he helped catch, and revenge was the reason for his arrest. He asked the judge to consider El Puma's years of service in the Tamaulipas State Police and the fact that his accusers' identities were unknown as proof of his innocence. However, the judge ordered El Puma to be held without bail and under federal custody. Because of his questionable entry into the U.S., the judge also mentioned the possibility of holding El Puma on immigration charges. On January 14, 2008, El Puma went to court with tight security. The police closed off parking lots near the courthouse and screened over 30 of El Puma's family members who came to the hearing. The SWAT team of the Hidalgo County Sheriff's Office was ready in case anything happened, and El Puma was supposed to be held at the McAllen Police Department during the trial with the help of the United States Marshals Service. El Puma was facing 10 charges for drug trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering from 2005 to 2007. During the 7-day trial, the jury reviewed the exhibits presented by the prosecution, which included drug seizure samples and hours of wiretapped conversations between smugglers in the Rio Grande Valley. More than a handful of criminals who worked under El Puma testified against him in court and identified him as the leader of the cartel in Reynosa. El Puma claimed he was innocent, while his defense team stated that the witnesses were testifying against their client in exchange for lighter sentences. None of them said they ever met El Puma in person or saw him committing a crime. They described how the Gulf Cartel was able to reduce liability by keeping low-level criminals away from the core operations of the cartel. Interestingly, when asked if any of the witnesses had seen El Puma in person or committing a crime, all of them responded with a resounding no. This was because none of them had any direct contact with him. El Puma's attorney argued that the witnesses' testimonies did not directly link him to the accusations. In the past, this would have probably been enough to help an alleged drug kingpin go free, but the prosecution argued that El Puma stirred the direction of his criminal activities through his subordinates on purpose to avoid capture. On January 22nd, after deliberating for almost 8.5 hours over 2 days, El Puma was found guilty of all the charges: 10 counts of narco-trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering. El Puma didn't show any emotion when they read the verdict. His lawyer said that he was surprised by the verdict because he didn't think there was enough proof to reach the verdict. However, he accepted the decision and said that he would think about his next move. Meanwhile, some of El Puma's family members who were at the court cried when they heard the verdict. El Puma's oldest daughter, Sandra Landin, later told reporters that her dad was a great person. "He's the best father and grandfather. We love him a lot," she said. On April 29, 2008, El Puma got sentenced to life in prison in McAllen by a U.S. district judge. However, his sentence was later reduced and was set to be in October 2029. He was imprisoned at the Federal Medical Center, Butner, a North Carolina federal security prison for inmates with special health needs. He died in prison on December 9, 2021. U.S. federal authorities said that catching El Puma was a big deal and one of the most important drug cases they've closed in years. They emphasized how working together with Mexican officials and various U.S. agencies played a crucial role. The DEA acknowledged that their teamwork in fighting drug-related issues in Mexico got better during President Felipe Calderón's time. Calderón had launched a campaign against organized crime in 2006, making the Gulf Cartel a top priority. Moreover, U.S. federal authorities mentioned that this case could be a guide for handling future cases involving big crime bosses. They explained that they built the case against El Puma step by step, starting from information gathered from lower-level criminals caught in the U.S. and Mexico. Slowly, this helped them piece together details about the leadership of the cartel. Ociel Cardenas' hearing took place in a locked courtroom, preventing the public from seeing what was going on. He had taken a plea deal and got a lighter sentence of 25 years in prison. In exchange, he agreed to tell U.S. agents everything they needed to know to bring down the cartel. Authorities would also go on to arrest more Los Zetas and Gulf Cartel leaders, including Ociel Cardenas' brother Mario who had taken over leadership of the cartel after the death of their other brother Antonio. He was extradited to the US in 2022. Gregorio Sauceda Gamboa was also arrested in 2009 alongside his wife and bodyguard. Ociel Cardenas' arrest and extradition created a power vacuum within the Gulf Cartel, with various factions fighting for control of the group. In 2010, Los Zeta broke away from the group to create their own cartel, leading to a bloody turf war. Since then, more violent cartels have popped up, and they continue to terrorize the people of Mexico. What do you think about this case? Will the Mexican authorities ever find a solution to the cartel menace going on in the country? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button for more interesting content.